Earthlings. My guest today is Mark Sargent. Today we're going to address a topic that not only is one of the greatest conspiracy theories on the Earth, but also happens to be about the Earth. Mark was born in Seattle, Washington. He grew up in South Whidbey Island and founded the Brimstone Fireworks Company when he was in college. He spent 3 years as a sous chef in a Greek restaurant, won the first computer pinball world tournament in 1994, and was hired by a PC game publisher in Boulder, Colorado the same year. He played computer games for a living until 1997, and he's been in the Boulder technology sector ever since. Mark's not married, he doesn't have kids, so most of his extensive free time is spent unraveling the hidden truths of our civilization and the never-ending search for the meaning of life itself. If you had to pick one single motto, it would be hope for the best, prepare for the worst. A close second is don't regret what you've done, regret what you haven't. Mark, welcome to First Contact Radio. Thank you for being here.
Thanks. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm really excited about this topic, and I know lots of people are, and the response you've had from it is more than you realized that you'd have.
Indeed.
And my response to it is certainly more than I ever thought I would have on this particular subject. But when the truth is out there, we need to we embrace it, and we know.
Agreed.
So I became aware of you through your video series, the clues about the Flat Earth Clues. What prompted you to want to create this, and what is like the kind of overall essence of what this series is about?
Initially, why I created it was I had started out looking at other conspiracies, and this was one that I just hadn't looked at. Like most conspiracy people, I hadn't looked at it for the longest time because it's ridiculous, it's ludicrous, and it is the worst conspiracy you'd ever want to back. So. But I eventually said, okay, I'm going to open this box and see what's inside. And, for me, there was no doubt. It's like, okay, there's nothing in here. So I'll just look through it and I'll be done with it very, very quickly. But as I was looking through it, I started to go down the path of the history of how the globe came to be. And I noticed that as I was going through it, that most of our history, for the first 4,500 years of who we are, it was always a flat or flat-ish enclosed system, and that spans all religions, all cultures. There's myths and legends going back forever. You can find it everywhere. So I thought, okay, that's fairly interesting, but I really wanted to see, eventually, I think science takes over, and they prove it's a globe, and that's all there is to it. So, I started going through the timeline, and I realized that about 1500, mid 1500s, the scientists, through a sort of scientific revolution, start molding the Earth from a flat system, flat enclosed system that looked like this, into a globe. And the churches and religions kind of bent with it because, at that point you've got a real division. You've got one idea that says, well, it's flat, it's an enclosed system. The other says, no, it's a wide open globe system. And the two just couldn't live together. So the church says, okay, we're just gonna go with this. And, it's not that much of a stretch for us. Fine. It's a globe. God still created the globe, and we'll move forward with it. But the problem was that there was no way to prove it. And, so 1500s, they were saying that, this is where we live, but there was literally no way to prove it. They weren't even remotely close. They were centuries away from ever proving it. And so, you go through the centuries, from 1500 all the way up to about 1900, and then you start getting planes. And then around the middle of the 1950s, when we were doing explorations down in Antarctica, things started changing. And what I mean by that is everybody started acting, the governments, the very rich people, and the royalty, everybody started acting really, really strange. And so I started going backwards, working through the timelines, and I realized that as I was going through it, I just found more and more evidence that this isn't where we live. And it was wrong. And as I progressed further and further down this path, it became more and more apparent to me that this was just a symbol. This is just an image that they put out there, and the real world looks nothing like it. So that's how I started.
Okay, cool. So you put together this series. You have 11 videos that part of it.
Yep.
And I thought that your organization was amazing.
Thank you.
And with information like this, the key to me is how well information is organized, because people need to really have things explained to them very thoroughly.
Yeah.
So in that regard, I thought if we go systematically in the order that you did your
Sure.
presentation, that might really be good. So your first one is called Empty Theater.
Empty Theater. And that was more of a teaser more than anything else, because if you believe in the enclosed system, then there are certain rules you have to follow. And one of which is the space program is absolutely put into not just question, but complete doubt at that point. And so Empty Theater really touched on, and then again, it was kind of, easing people into it, because I know this is a jarring subject. It was jarring for me. I certainly didn't want to believe it. For people out there that understand, so, he's nuts, he's crazy. It's like, no, I was looking at this thing, and I was looking at it for 9 months, and I was going, every time I looked at it, I was going, oh, please don't be flat. Please don't be flat. But it kept coming up flat. So the first thing I threw at people was Empty Theater, which was the noted absence of Hollywood movies that dealt with the moon missions at all. And it was striking to me how well it was hidden, because people don't understand. You can ask people, it's like, oh yeah, you remember that mission about the moon, the movie about the moon, and people will go, oh yeah, their initial reaction is, oh yeah, there's a movie about the moon. I go, really? What is it? And then they'll start looking back, and every movie they reference, every movie they're thinking about is usually a science fiction movie. It's Red Planet, or it's 2001: A Space Odyssey, or it's Mission to Mars, or it's something like that. And so I went down, I said, okay, look, this is what we've seen so far. Hollywood makes a ton of science fiction movies that go into space, and then a smaller group of movies that deal with sort of a pseudo future, like what could happen in space.
Right.
But then you start digging into movies like, okay, what about factual accounts? Like the greatest achievement of all time, which is supposedly our trip to the moon. Where's the movie there? And I looked, and I'm a big media guy. I absorb all media, and I'm a big movie buff. And I realized as I was going through my mind, I was going, and then looking up on Wiki and looking at all the stuff, I was going, there is no movies. The closest thing we had, if the moon missions supposedly ended in 1972, the first movie that was even made wasn't until 1983, and that was called The Right Stuff, which was really just an astronaut recruiting movie more than anything. It was, it was just, the astronaut training program, and it was 3 hours long. Excuse me. And at the end of those 3 hours, they barely even made it into low Earth orbit. And there was no sequel. It won a whole bunch of awards, made a ton of money. It was absolutely left wide open to, excuse me, my voice is losing. It was absolutely left wide open to a sequel, but it didn't happen. So after that, there wasn't a single movie referencing it until 1995 with Apollo 13, starring, all big names, and I think it was directed by Ron Howard. And after 1995, that was it. There were no moon movies, and it sticks out. People don't understand. It's like, how, why? Full well. You being down in Los Angeles, Hollywood makes everything. They make sequels to utter crap, and you're telling me no one's touching this script. No one could come up with a moon landing footage, and the reason was, and I say it in the clip. It's like, look, because you can't do a moon movie. You cannot simulate a moon movie, because if you have the actual moon footage, what they're pushing off is the actual moon footage, and a real Hollywood movie that it's dead on, then you get that weird blurring of the lines, and people will go, well, wait, it looks just like the same thing. So how do we know that's real? And that was, I have no doubt in my mind that is NASA's big thing. Is like, we're just not, if anything even comes down the pike in Hollywood along those lines, it is redirected somewhere else.
Right.
So that was Empty Theater.
Well, what we know now is they actually did make a Hollywood moon movie back in 1969, and they had one of the greatest directors of all time directed it. So
Stanley Kubrick, you're absolutely right. And again, there's no coincidence there that he started working on 2001: A Space Odyssey, the greatest space epic of all time, in 1963, the exact same time that the moon program was firing up. The rumors that he worked for him, they're not rumors. He absolutely worked for him, and it went bad, and he wrote it. He got so soured with it that he wrote his entire confession into The Shining, which was made in 1980. He wrote it in code. Anyone can look it up. The documentary is called Room 237. It's brilliant, and I have no doubt.
So we're going to move on now to part 2, And the second part is Birdwall. So, what is Birdwall all about?
Birdwall was really my point of no return. Birdwall covered the exploration of the parts of the world we hadn't discovered yet. And more
Okay.
specifically, we went down the road of Admiral Richard E. Byrd. And
Okay.
he is most known for the hollow earth theory because he explored the North Pole in 1926. And and we're not going to talk about the hollow earth theory because it's everything, all the really interesting stuff when it came to that guy came to the South Pole. So in
Okay.
1928 he was recruited to start doing explorations down the South Pole, and from 1928 until about 1954 he did four big expeditions, and I'm going to include Operation High Jump, which we won't go into detail here. But
Okay.
what had happened was he went down there and it was like he was looking for something. And for me, there was little doubt that the authority knew. At the highest level, people knew. You know, if you want to talk about royalty or very rich people or old governments, people knew at the highest level what the world should have looked like. But unless you have the technology to exploit it, you're not going to be able to do anything. So eventually you're going to have to prove it out, because after
Hmm.
20 generations, it really just diminishes into legend. You know, if you, let's say
Okay.
you're the Prince of Spain, yeah, your grandfather, this map has been passed down and your father before him. And it's like, yeah, but we can't go
Hmm.
there, so who cares? So they
Right.
picked a guy named Richard Byrd, and they sent him down to the South Pole, and he was doing expeditions down there for a long time. And then in 1954, he took a quick break to get ready for his next expedition, and he went up to the States and he started doing interviews on
Okay.
television. And he did one for CBS, and it was very, very interesting, and we're lucky to have it. You know, it's on YouTube. You can download it. You know, Richard E. Byrd. It's a very easy. You know, it's black and white, but it's a very, very telling interview where he goes over the details of his last mission. He was super excited about being back from Antarctica. Could not say enough about it. And what he really couldn't say enough about, yeah. So yes, from a scientific standpoint, it's very, very interesting. There's a vast mass of land bigger than the United States that he hadn't even flown over yet. You know, human eyes
Hmm.
literally hadn't seen it. And of course, that was kind of telling for me. It's like, because that was obviously going to be the first place he headed back down to for the next mission.
Right.
But the
Right.
big thing he talked about was that Antarctica was really just made out of money from a resource standpoint. It
Hmm.
was just a treasure trove. It had everything. It had an entire mountain range made out of coal. Where does that happen? It
Right.
had oil, it had minerals, it had uranium, and all these things. You know, people were already salivating and getting ready for it. It wasn't just the Americans. The Russians were down there, who was trying to rebuild from World War II. They had a very big vested interest in that, which he mentions at the back part of his interview. The Great Britain was down there, Argentina, Chile, New Zealand. They were all down there. Everyone was getting psyched up, and best I could figure was what was happening was, let's say you had the old map and you saw what the world really looked like, and you send down your best guy, and whatever
Hmm.
they were sending him down to find, he wasn't finding it. And
Okay.
he hadn't been finding it for 20, 30 years. And so they finally said, well, let's just start making money on this thing. And again, that's Murphy's Law, because as soon as you say
Right.
that, at least we can get the money out of it. And as soon
Exactly.
as you do that, that's when things go wrong. And so in 1955, he was sent down for one final mission. And I mean one final mission, because this is the last mission anyone ever goes down there for. You say, oh no, they probably had missions in the 70s, 80s, 90s. No, no expeditions publicly ever happened in Antarctica again, because they
Hmm.
found something super scary.
Right.
And so he goes down there in 1955, 1956, called Operation Deep Freeze, an American expedition, and everything seemed to be going well. The expedition ends, but then things start getting super weird around the world. Governments start making these big, big moves and start doing big, big things. And they don't seem like they're connected when you first look at them. But when you start
Hmm.
looking at the timeline, it starts to make sense, but it only makes sense in an enclosed system. So the first thing that happened was, after 1956, 1957, Russia and America became really frantic over rocketry programs, and they
Okay.
started building rockets. And then within a year after they're building their first rockets, they decided to put nuclear weapons on the top of them and start firing them straight up into the air and
Hmm.
detonating these weapons. And they did that starting in 1958. And after the second shot, which was the early part of 1958. And you guys can look this up. Just Google high altitude nuclear explosions. You'll see it. After that second shot, NASA was founded right away. It's like, okay, all of a sudden you just militarize space. It's like, all right, maybe that's not connected to anything. And then you keep firing, and then within, I think, 9 months later, they seal off Antarctica. And by that I mean all the nations abandoned everything simultaneously, all the oil, all the coal, the uranium, the minerals. They abandoned it simultaneously, and they put a treaty in place in 1959 called the Antarctic Treaty. 10 nations signed it then, and they basically made a treaty that says no one gets to go down to Antarctica again, period. And any nation that and had this weird, and any nation that came on board, so like if you're a nation to become industrialized, you have to sign this treaty. You can't even debate it with them. So it's like, well, what about the oil and the coal? Nope, you're signing this. It means you're not going down to Antarctica. Well, how long? Well, forever. And that treaty is not even debatable at this point all the way until the year 2041. It's ridiculous. It is, it is not what we are. It's not what we do. We, especially on the American front, we are a capitalistic, greed-filled society. If there's oil, we're going to get it. It doesn't matter where it is. We will start wars to get it. We will go into your national parks. We will do everything. And then there's this Antarctica thing. It's like they won't even petition it. They won't even put anything on paper. It's like they're told, whoever it is at the highest level of the petroleum industry has been told, don't talk about it. You don't bring it up anywhere. You don't mention it in the press conferences. This is something, and I don't even know if they're even told why. They just says, look, it's a matter of national security. And it's like, well, which nation? Is it a national security thing? Because you had 8 different nations, including the USSR at the time. And everyone agreed at the same time. When does that happen? When does everybody agree to leave at the same time? So for me, the Birdwall, there was absolutely no doubt in my mind, because that they had found the edge of the firmament or the enclosure or whatever you want it, because they couldn't come up with a cover story big enough to keep people off. You'd think, well, if it's just the wall, maybe you can put a perimeter, maybe 100 miles out to where you can't see it. No, you can't take that chance, because let's say you let the oil companies in. The problem there is you let the oil companies, you let the mining companies in. Sooner or later, either by accident, either someone's going to stray off course with a helicopter or a plane, or they're going to say, what they'll probably do is they'll point to that area and they'll say, hey, we want to explore over there. And then the military says, no, that's ours. You can't go over there. And be, what are you talking about? Why can't we go over there? And so the oil companies would keep pushing the boundaries, and it would never end. It'd be this tug of war, and the governments and the military decide, you know what, we're not even going to address it. We're just going to keep them off, because it's bigger than money. Right. And that's bizarre, because the moment someone sets up a boundary, that's a clue for those who are paying attention that there's something that they don't want you to see. Exactly. And this is not like Area 51, where you put up motion sensors and big scary signs saying lethal force authorized, because that's just a small part of Nevada. That's just a small part of a desert. This is literally like shutting off the entire section of South America. It's that big, and it's like, why would you shut off a piece of land that big? Because it's not it's not a military, secret military base of ours. Plus, why would all countries shut off an area that big? Right. Again, this is not people don't understand. This is not an American problem. This is a global problem. Right. So, all right. Well, let's take a look at some of this clip of Admiral Byrd on the TV show.
Our very distinguished guest for this evening is Admiral Richard E. Byrd.
The North Pole used to be a no man's land, but these are the days when, by buying a ticket on a commercial airliner, you can fly across the North Pole and drink a cocktail at the same time. Only 60 or more years ago, about 35 years ago, our guest tonight found out whether there was any land north of the North American continent. He made that first discovery flight, and I must say that Admiral Byrd, our guest tonight, is not only our greatest living explorer, but he's been an inspiration to countless Americans. Admiral Byrd, you've been to both the North Pole and the South Pole. Is there any unexplored land left on this earth that might appeal to adventurous young Americans?
Yes, there is.
and not up around the North Pole, because it's getting crowded up there now, because they find out it's really usable, not only to live in, but militarily. But strangely enough, there's left in the world today an area as big as the United States that's never been seen by a human being. And that's beyond the pole, on the other side of the South Pole, from Middle America. And I think it's quite astonishing that there should be an area as big as that unexplored.
That's a tremendous
So
challenge.
there's a lot of adventure left down at the bottom of the world.
Admiral, an expedition to which I believe you're the advisor is now en route. What is that expedition doing?
Well, that's the icebreaker Atka, and it's a reconnaissance expedition. It's going down to the South Pole area to make certain observations and to look for some bases. They will be back in April, and they will report back, and upon the information we get from that undertaking, we will base the bigger expedition that's to follow.
Is that very definitely planned, or is that...
That is being planned right now. So I'm willing to say to you that there will be a number of expeditions that will follow, I think, year after year, at the bottom of the world, because the government has really become interested.
Well, Admiral Byrd, I can understand, I think everybody can, the interest in the North Pole because it's so near our greatest challenger, Soviet Russia. But why this interest in the bottom of the world? Nobody living down there, is there?
No, it's pretty cold. There's only one permanent resident, that's the emperor penguin. The little ones live further north. I tell you one reason they're interested. It's by far the most valuable, important place left in the world for science. That's why the scientific groups all over the nation are really interested. But more important than that, it has to do with the future of the nation, those to come after us, or even during your lifetime, because it happens to be an untouched reservoir of natural resources. And you know, as the world shrinks with an ever-increasing acceleration, far-flung places, once useless, like we thought the North Pole was, and no man's land, become very useful. The bottom of the world will be important, not only to us, but to our allies.
I was going to ask you, does it have military importance?
It has some, and as the world shrinks, it will continue to shrink with an ever-increasing acceleration, thus bringing these places closer. And in the future, I can see a time when it will be very, very important strategically.
Well, has the development of air power increased the strategic importance of places like the
very much
Parma
so.
Peninsula, was it?
Very much so. Even now, if anything happened and we lost the Panama Canal, we would have to control the islands just north of Antarctica, which are part of Antarctica. Then between there and Cape...
Admiral, you speak of the resources of Antarctica. What are they? What are the natural resources there?
Well, we've found enough of coal within 180 miles of the South Pole in a great ridge of mountains. It's not covered with snow, enough to supply the whole world for quite a while.
Well,
that's the coal. Now, there's evidence of many other minerals. We are pretty sure there's oil. Now, that coal shows the bottom of the world. Now, by far the coldest spot in the world. Where that coal is gets 100 below zero in the winter.
Well,
it was once tropical. So we think there's oil there, and there's evidence, probably uranium there.
is it any secret, is there uranium there? That would be the only thing that would be practical to actually go after, I suppose. Everything else would be economically unfeasible, wouldn't it?
Well, as we recklessly expend our resources, the time will come when we'll have to go after that stuff down there. Well, you know, I avoided what you said about uranium. I'm not sure about that. I don't want to have the world fight over the Antarctic.
Admiral, is there a competition among other nations to try to get information about Antarctica and possibly to secure some of these resources?
Well, yes. There are now 7 nations very much interested. Russia is interested tremendously. That I'm sure of. Australia has an expedition down there. The Argentine the Chile, New Zealand, Britain, and so on. Now, you can understand those people down there being interested because they live down there, the New Zealanders, the Argentinians, the Chileans, and Australians. And so we don't do much about claiming anything.
Admiral, you make this sound a little crowded. Are there that many expeditions now there or en route there?
Well, you know, as I said, it's the most peaceful place in the world, but I don't think it will be for long because of this intense interest on the part of other nations and this nation.
Okay, so the next part of the video series was Mapmakers, and this is where it starts to address a bit more of what the Earth looks like and ideas that what some of the ancients believed in the maps and how the world looked as opposed to what we looked at it right now.
Yes. So when I was initially going down this road, Mapmakers I had actually discovered before the Birdwall, but I wanted to give it its own section, which was I had to find what the consensus was as far as how the world looked from an enclosed point of view. So I was looking for a flat map. And so, yeah, I found the flat Earth map, and it was kind of interesting because, it had all the continents clumped in the center, and then, big ring of oceans, the southern hemisphere oceans, and then the entire thing was surrounded by a giant ring of frozen continent, which we know as Antarctica. I thought that was pretty interesting. But I was looking everywhere for the maps, and I got into the wiki projections list of map projections, which shows just about every map that's ever been proposed on the world. Not necessarily in chronological order, but there's some interesting stuff there, including the Mercator map that's used in schools. That's by the blackboard versus the Gall Peters map, which is the one they're trying to get into schools, and they can't even get that into schools because they're saying no, it's too much of a shock to people, and we've been teaching this other map for so long. But anyway, I get down to the circular maps, and I run into something called the azimuthal equidistant map.
Okay.
And that's a circular map, and it looked eerily similar to the flat Earth map. Continents grouped in the center, surrounded by the ocean, surrounded by that giant ring that was called Antarctica. So I started comparing the two maps, and they were absolutely identical. But one of them was linked as a map that was used by the United States Geological Survey as the current map of the world, and the flat Earth map was linked to nothing. That was linked to Crazy Town, and people that believed in that were obviously tinfoil hat people. So what was weird was the azimuthal map, again, the identical map, was also used by the UN flag, which was very interesting because why would the UN flag have, from their standpoint, there was one thing missing because the UN flag doesn't have Antarctica on their map, and the azimuthal equidistant does. So why didn't the UN flag put the ring of Antarctica around the edge of the map? They left it out deliberately. Not only that, but they replaced it apparently with a series of large spiky wreaths around the outside, and I think that was one of your in your face moments. They were like, oh yeah, by the way, we know now. Who knows at that level? We'll know. But what was also interesting about those, both the UN flag and the azimuthal map, was they were very, very old maps, meaning they were proposed, and you can see the link. It's like proposed 1000 AD, and you're going, oh, that's got to be a typo. And then you see who was proposed by, which was a Persian scientist named Al-Biruni. His full name, I'm not going to get into it because it's really hard and I might choke. And it was proposed, and he lived about 1,000 years ago, and he was a Persian scientist, very disciplined in lots of different things. And that's the map they're using. So why is the United States government using a Persian scientist's 1,000-year-old map back when we knew the world was flat? Why are they still using this? Did they leave it on Wiki accidentally? Did somebody just happen to slip that in there? I don't even know if it was one of those in-your-face things, but it was very, very intriguing to me. So I had to make a note of it because it's the only map out of all those projections that's linked to anybody. You think, oh, this map's linked to, like Spain or, different countries, different organizations. No, everything's blank, 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 blank. United States government, United Nations, blank, 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 blank. So.
And the ancients, for the most part, believed that the earth was flat. There's many references in the book of Genesis. Throughout the Bible, we have the Egyptians at one point, the Greeks, the Mayans. If we read Zechariah Sitchin's book, he's talking about, the earth was a flat disk with a dome over it. Yeah. So it's not a common theory.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's not a new theory. It's the way it was looked at until it was changed.
Yeah, for 4,500 years, the majority of our civilization, that's what we thought the Earth looked like. It was flat when it was enclosed in some sort of dome-like structure. What it's made out of, who knows? But it was definitely enclosed. No one's getting out. And it only changed starting around the 1500s. So it was, and then, so yeah, this image that you're looking at has not been around that long, and was, literally could not be proven until the 1950s, when, of course, we'll get into it later, which is, if you found out it didn't look like this after you've been handing out these things for 20 generations, do you tell people?
Right. Good question. All right. The next in this series is part 4, Shell Beach. What is Shell Beach? The gist of that.
Shell Beach kind of delved into things that we've done from a Hollywood standpoint to what we've done to simulate enclosed worlds, because a lot of people don't understand that there's quite a few enclosed worlds that we've actually covered in cinema. And because people relate to that, they latch on to these things. So I brought on, the first thing I talked about was Dark City, which there's a reference to Shell Beach in Dark City, and that is Dark City was an enclosed system that was built, but it was very small. So it was built only the size of a city, and the city actually went out to the outer edges. So it was this circular city that was enclosed, and the people didn't know they lived inside it because all the roads didn't reach the edge. And so people would drive around in circles, and they also altered their memories on a regular basis so they wouldn't catch on to anything. But every once in a while, someone would wake up and they'd figure it out. But Shell Beach was something that was supposedly outside the city, but it was only a memory. Shell Beach didn't exist in real life, but nobody knew that. So the joke was in the movie, it's like, how do you get to Shell Beach? And no matter what train you took, no matter what road you took, you could never quite get there. And so you'd ask people in the movie, it's like, so yeah, you've been to Shell Beach, right? It's like, yeah. Do you remember how to get there? And they go, wait, how do we? They wouldn't remember. It was a fragmented thing. But that's how I started people. And then I went into the movie, which just about anybody that wants to really get hold of this model really should look at it, and that's The Truman Show, which was done, I think, in the mid-90s. And it was, The Truman Show, for those of you who haven't missed it, really, it's, one of Jim Carrey's best work, but it's also a fantastic example of what an enclosed system can do, because the system was designed, it was, less than 20 miles wide. And it was a single city where you raise a kid from birth into the system. Everybody else is actors and extras. And you raise a kid from birth inside the enclosed world, well, he's not going to know he's in the enclosed world. Everybody else knows he's there, but nobody, he doesn't know, because why would he? When we're young, and that was the whole point of what what that video was about, was if you're born into the system when we're young, we believe that people are going to tell us the truth, our parents, our government, anybody, why would people lie to us? But the illusion is so easy to project on kids, which is, again, why this globe was such a great idea. The globe model, it's like, look, you put this into a first grade classroom, they stare at it for 12 years. You don't even have to point at it. People will just go, they just stare at, they feel it. It's like, oh, yeah, they totally understand. By the time they're out, you say, oh, yeah, where do you live? Oh, I live here. Why would you ever question that? So the Truman Show dug into the aspect of what you could do with the Truman Show model if you made it bigger. And as you made it bigger, I found that once you get at least one generation of people in there, let's say the first generation were actors, once those actors have children, if the children don't know, if they don't tell them, then when the parents die, that link, that knowledge is gone. And at that point, the children and their children and every generation after that don't know where they live. Exactly. They think they know where they live, but they don't actually know. And so when I was building on that, I realized that as you scaled the system up to hundreds of miles and then thousands of miles, the actors can be removed entirely, and the maintenance becomes so much easier because everything else happens naturally in the inside. All you have to do is protect the perimeter. You build in systems to where they think they're turning around on their own, but actually they're turning around because you put the system in place. Like, it gets too cold out towards the edge. Oh, I'm going to turn back. There's icebergs. I'm going to turn back. It's getting hard to breathe. I'm climbing down the mountain at this point, or my balloon's going up too high. And people, and I touched on that in The Village by M. Night Shyamalan as well, which didn't even need a dome. That's what made that movie so brilliant. It's like, look, if you buy a piece of land in a wildlife preserve and raise kids there, they're going to believe anything you tell them. So you could, if you want them to make believe they're in the Old West, that's exactly what they're going to believe. Why would they believe anything different? And the same thing applies here. We believe this because we're born into it, and our families beforehand. There's no, there's so much history has gone by now that no one would ever question it. 20 generations it doesn't sound like a long time. It is a long, long time.
Enough to condition a lot of people to believe something.
Yes, exactly.
And you got belief and fact, and those two things often run into each other.
Agreed.
And we got the something's in the collective consciousness, because there's other movies that seem to have the same theme. The most recently, we got The Signal.
Yep.
We got Under the Dome.
Yep, Under the Dome. The Simpsons movie, where they put the dome over the entire city. And again, don't think these things are happening by accident. It's I don't like to necessarily throw out the word predictive programming too loosely because it's overused, I think, in the conspiracy world. But for me, you have to, because this is so big, you can't hide it forever because we all live here. It's like hiding something in your own apartment from somebody else. Sooner or later, they're going to run into it. You can't bury it forever. So contingency plans are already in place. And the more stuff you show with domed or enclosed systems, the less shock it will be if something comes about. It's so people don't, so people can get their head around it. It's like, oh, we're in the Truman Show.
Right.
They won't freak out nearly as they'll still freak out, but they won't freak out as much.
They have a bit of it's easier to grasp.
Exactly.
So part 5 is called Status Quo, and this begins to get into the who was involved with this picture, and now we start talking about the major religions, and this is where we kind of backtrack to realize that all of the major religions at one point all had a flat Earth model.
Yes.
And then suddenly things changed when science met religion.
Exactly. The big 5 major religions, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity, they all pretty much shared the same, they may have, gone to war and fought each other, but, at the basic level, they still believed pretty much what the world looked like. And that was, a flattish system with an enclosure that, people can't get out of. And for me, when I got into status quo, I was looking at what each of the religions wanted and why you would want to hide it from them. Because, when it comes to the authority, and by that I mean governments, the super rich, and royalty, they've got a vested interest in keeping the world at a certain pace and a certain type of technology. Mm-hmm. And so what happens here is this. So imagine all those religions, and every one of them is looking for a supernatural object. They're looking for an artifact that can solidify their religions. Every religion wants something that'll put them on top. Whether it be the Holy Grail, whether it be the Ark of the Covenant. I can't remember what the Buddhism and Hinduism ones are, but they're pretty good. But everyone's looking for it. And if they can find it, they will hold on to it, and that will be, their new point of focus. So imagine if you were out on Antarctica and you found, the firmament, something in it. Fine. If they want to call it a wall or a barrier, even if it was a force field, it doesn't matter, because all the religions would say the same thing. This is obviously the enclosure, therefore it is part of our religion, and we have a vested interest in it. So imagine if all the religions at the same time in the world got the same artifact at the same time. There would be a huge shift in how people thought. And from a scientific standpoint, because remember, the exploration teams, they're science-based. Remember what Byrd said? He goes, it's a great thing for science, Antarctica. So you've got all these scientists down there in Antarctica, and military and government and the rich people that are backing them. And all of a sudden, you find this thing. Well, it's a tough call, because you're going to be firing a lot of your people if this happens. You're going to be disbanding a lot of the people that are on there in the ice with you. So it's this weird self-preservation thing. It's like, okay, all these scientists, they won't have jobs anymore. All these guys over here, they won't, have jobs anymore. And so the decision was made at that point to hide it, because they knew if they didn't, there would be a potential backlash. And I'm going to use the Archer reference. They were afraid of a revenge rampage from religion, because religion has been slapped around for a long time on this. Science has had their way, but if religion all of a sudden came back and said, oh, by the way, the firmament, we got dibs on that. We had this long before you came up with the word force field. then then science, they're going to be backpedaling, and they didn't want to do it.
Right.
So
Right. And just as a point of reference, because you mentioned the word firmament, firmament is what is described as this dome that is over us.
yes,
And the book of Genesis talks about the firmament that separates the waters from above as from the waters from below.
yeah,
So as we're talking about that, we're talking about some sort of closure that is a dome-like structure.
yeah. Genesis 1, by the way, and it's not even like it's not like one of those later books in the Bible. This isn't New Testament. This isn't back the back part of the Old Testament. This is the first book that talks about this. So it's for them, religion. Oh, they haven't forgotten this, not by a long shot. And they will absolutely break that verse out, and they will put it on billboards everywhere if this comes out.
Right. Very good. So part 6 of your series is called Depth Perception, where it gets into a bit more description of what is this closed model and why wouldn't anybody bother to go out, up, or down? What are the restrictions that kind of keeping them in place?
Yeah. I summarized, and then I got into geologic systems. But what I did was I said, okay, let's look what we know so far. And if you were going to build a flat model, there's certain systems you would put in place that would seem like natural systems, but they're really more deterrents to keep people away from the edge. But it's a soft deterrent. It's a pushback. So, for example, first thing you would do, I love this little thing where you add 3% salt solution to the oceans. That's brilliant, because what it does is you can't drink the water you're sailing on. So if you're doing explorations, a lot of those exploration voyages were based on how much fresh water you had on board. And if you could just keep replenishing that, you'd go so much further. I mean, that reduces exploration by 95%. You reduce the temperature on a flat model as you get further and further to the outer edge, to the point where saltwater freezes at about 15 degrees. And then you start seeing icebergs. That'll deter wooden ships. Everything on the outside. And then if you actually made it to the outer edge, you run into Antarctica, and that goes up 2 miles, almost straight up, and then it stays at 2 miles. So you're at 10,000 feet, and a lot of people are going to get altitude sickness at that sort of thing, sort of range. And then even if you did get up there and you started trudging across the ice, there's no plant life, there's no animals to eat, there's no anything. So there's so many deterrents on the outer edge. It's just layers and layers of things to keep you out there, or I'm sorry, to keep you off the ice. And the upper part is easier. One, because you need technology to do it. You couldn't even get balloons. Balloons to carry people weren't even invented until 1760, which means, that's thousands of years worth of stuff you didn't even have to worry about. And then even if you did go up there, you get less and less oxygen, and the temperature drops off. So you don't have to deal with oceans, but it's getting super cold, and you're not breathing so well. So you're not going to be doing much there. Between those two mechanisms, that keeps you from going out to the edge or going up too high. And then I covered the thing I didn't talk about at that point until I dealt with this clue was the geologic systems. Because sooner or later, because everybody knows how to dig, they're going to dig really deep. That's people love digging holes for some reason. And they're going to dig, and how far can you dig on a flat model? Because eventually, that old joke, you dig your way to China, right? Well, no, you can't dig your way to China. As a matter of fact, you can't dig your way very far, turns out, at all. Because once you dig down to a point of about 8 miles, it doesn't matter what you're using. If you're using a high-speed alloy drill bit, it starts turning to clay because of the heat. The heat just starts getting warmer and warmer, and to the point where the drill bits fail. So nobody's drilled below 8 miles anywhere in the world, unless you're talking about classified military, but that's a whole other thing. And that's when the question is like, okay, well, we know that because there's molten rock. There's lava underneath us. And, we know what the core of the Earth looks like. It's like, really? You sure you know what the core of the Earth looks like? Because if you've only drilled down 8 miles, you don't know anything. And science is the first person to say, oh, we're using seismographs. We're using all sorts of sonar and underground radar. We're doing all sorts of stuff. Do you know what it looks like? Well, we're kind of extrapolating. So when it comes to the molten rock, they said, well, it's probably a natural process. No, it's not a natural process. You don't have to, in a structure this size, if it's 8,000 miles across, and you've already built systems to keep, natural systems, which work perfectly to keep people off the edge or up top, you're really going to leave something to chance on the lower section? No. The lava system is artificial from the beginning, and there is no doubt in my mind that everything is controlled, including that.
Right. As you're talking, the scene that's popping in my head is that scene in They Live, where they beam underground, and then you see this whole structure, and then he actually goes out to like a platform that's outlooking space.
Sure.
And it's like, okay, what's going on down there? There's like, because if you have a system where the top is a dome and this is where people are living, you got to have some sort of mechanism underneath that perhaps is powering this system, keeping it going.
Exactly. And entire civilizations could live underground, that, and they would absolutely make sure that we didn't discover them, because if you're on the ground, that's the easiest people to get to. It's like
Right.
if we found out there was a civilization underground, people would be relentless, because digging's easy. And the other thing I try to tell people when they bring up certain geologic systems or anything that, it's like, well, it's obvious, proves the globe. It's like, look, if you build a structure that big, if you have the technology to build a structure that big and that complex, is there anything you can't do? Because if you can actually, well, they obviously can't do that. It's like, well, then you're kidding yourself, because a structure, just the raw structure itself is such a huge accomplishment that it's almost limitless what can be done here.
Remember in what was it, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe? They were going through and they were creating the world.
Yeah, that's a wonderful, those scenes when they're building the worlds. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah. Now, granted, they were building globes, but still, planetary technology at that scale is again, you don't have to build the whole planet. That's the best part.
Right.
All you have to do is fake it. If everyone believes it's a planet, then it's working.
Right.
Everything.
Now, in regards to one of the questions that people often ask is, well, what about the curvature of the Earth? Can't you go so high and you get to a mountaintop and you look and you should see the curvature of the Earth? So
yeah, show me the curvature of the Earth. Show me a picture that doesn't use a fisheye lens. Show me something. The curvature of the Earth. Now, there may be a slight curve when it comes to the, at least in my model, because I think there has to be a little bit of a slope near the North Pole. But the rest of it, but it's not this drastic, huge curve. Check out the videos. There's lots of videos where people send up weather balloons and they don't show a curve. And the ones that do show a curve are generally using a fisheye lens. It's a very old, it's not even a camera trick. It's just a camera lens, which people use to give, better panoramic shots. The Red Bull one is a perfect example. And don't think that thing didn't get a lot of hits and was pushed out there, on accident. Everything that shows the curvature, anything that deliberately goes out of their way to show the curvature of the Earth, is being done to just keep reinforcing this on you, because people are starting to forget it. They're starting to see past it. And it's a good illusion. Remember, we're suckers for magic tricks. We believe a lot of that stuff, or we want to believe. That's the suspension of disbelief that's really kicking in here, because since we want to believe this, we will see this. We will not see the obvious.
Remember what Styx says. Just remember, it's a grand illusion.
Nice, good reference.
The next one in order was video number 7, which is called The Long Haul, but also there's a video number 9, which is called The Magic Show, and these two kind of go together.
Yes.
So,
if you're building a flat system, if you finally get your head around it and you're saying, okay, it's enclosed like the Truman Show, then there are 3 real basic rules that cannot be broken. They can be hidden, but they cannot be broken. The first rule, of course, is that the space program cannot exist in real life. It cannot. Everything you see in the space program is utterly a sham, and in my opinion, not even that good. You're not spending that much money on it. It's like, look, get some more funding, because it's awful. 2, you cannot take a picture of the Earth from space, because in an enclosed system, you wouldn't be able to get up high enough, and that is also true. The people don't realize, for those, I'm a little older, which is 15 years ago, when you did an internet search, an image search for the Earth from space, you literally got one picture, and that was a picture from supposedly 1969 or 68, depending on what you believe the date stamp to be. It's like, it was 2000. Why in the world are you using a picture from the 60s, for your picture of the Earth? It was stunning to me. And every picture you see now, when you're looking at the Earth, if you do a Google search, click on images, they're all composites, and they'll admit that they're composites. That's the part that kills me. But there's so many of them, and they're so much prettier than the original image that they released. That's like, okay, people just go with that. They don't understand that it's not they're all composites. They're not real shots. And that question has to be asked. It's like, okay, why aren't you taking pictures of the Earth from space? But the third rule, which you can actually get, it's more down to earth, so to speak, is the flight routes. And that is, if it's a flat map, if you're on a globe, you can take shortcuts. Like, for example, the perfect example here is on a globe, you have Australia in the southern hemisphere, and you have South America on the southern hemisphere. And I'm talking about the north part, the drug dealing part, the southern part. And if you're flying from Australia to South America, it's about 7,400 miles. It crosses the South Pacific Ocean. It's easy. It's a straight shot. Not a big deal at all. It's 12 hours, right? Should be 12 hours. But on a flat map, this route doesn't look like that, because if it's squished, that ocean then becomes bigger and it has a weird bow to it because it's pushed out to the side. So that 7,400 miles, if you're crossing the ocean, becomes a lot longer. It becomes more than 10,000 miles. And if that's the case, then what do you do? And if that was the case, then, and again, it's easy to prove, is those planes won't be going those routes, because you're not going to take a 10,000 mile flight around the ocean because it's going to screw everybody up. It's like, why is the flight taking so long? Plus the GPS is going to it'll make it seem like it's the plane's going way, way slower. So the only way you can get to where you need to go is you have to make a route that doesn't make any sense, because on a flat map you have to cut straight across the map, and on a globe that would be the equivalent of going from Australia, cutting across Los Angeles or San Francisco, and then coming back down to South America. It doesn't make sense. Why in the world would you do this if it was a globe?
Right.
But that's what they're doing. And so you do it in two ways. One, you make connections. And by that, I mean you create connections that take you places that you wouldn't normally go. And you do that to confuse people. You give big layovers. I mean, people, look it up. Go from Buenos Aires to Sydney, Australia, and see how many connections you got. See how long it takes. Should be a 12-hour flight. I've seen flight connections that run 50 plus hours, 52 hours. That's 3 days. You're pushing on the third day. Why would you ever do that?
Right.
But on a flat map, it works out perfectly. A flat map, that's exactly the route you would take. You would go from Australia, you'd cut near America, and then you'd go down. People say, well, wouldn't people notice flying over America? Well, not if you flew at night, and not if people weren't looking out the window. And people look out the window. Honestly, when I did domestic flights inside the country, I had no idea what state I was flying over, or what body of water. If I crossed a body of water, I'd be going, I have no idea where I am. Plus, the GPS system, which we're getting into, the GPS system will tell you what it wants you to see. And the GPS system was designed by the United States military, Department of Defense. And in my opinion, the GPS system, real or not, because if there's no satellites, then GPS system isn't even what they say it is. But real or not, it's going to tell you, it's going to project the image you want, or they want to see. So here's the thing. So I'm watching these flights, and this I'll get into. So the first thing is connections, and there'll be tons and tons of connections. If you're doing anything in the Southern Hemisphere, 95% of the flights are connections. However, there were people that were bugging me and saying, look, there's some nonstops and they don't make any sense. Because they can see the booking. It's like, well, it's obviously Santiago, Chile to Auckland, New Zealand. And the flight time looks right. The duration looks right. Explain that. The flat Earth thing's blown up. And I was going, no, it's not. Because you can't fake it. Because the rule cannot be broken. That's the best. Okay. That's what I love about the flat model, and that is, if it works, there's only certain things they can do. You cannot break the rules. You can't teleport anywhere. So what I did was I started watching the Southern Hemisphere, everything below the equator, on a GPS system, a real-time GPS system called planefinder.net. Now you can go to Flight Tracker 24 or Plane Tracker, there's a whole bunch, but it doesn't really matter because they're all getting their data from the same system, and that's the United States government, which is the GPS system. And I was starting to watch flights over the Southern Hemisphere. And they're easy to spot. I should be able to see a red plane, going over the water, especially in the South Pacific. And I was staring at it for 1 day, 2 days, 4 days, and I realized there was no planes flying over the oceans. And I was going, okay, why is that? How is that even possible? Because even if you had a connection, eventually you've got to get across the ocean, right? You got to fake it. And so I'm going, wait, where are all the planes? There's no planes over any of the oceans down there. South Atlantic, South Pacific, Indian Ocean, there's nothing there. So where are the planes? And I start staring at them, and then I realize that the planes aren't making it over the oceans because they're being erased from the GPS
Hmm.
system. So I started following, because the easiest one is to follow all the planes that are in Brazil, because Brazil has a lot of flights, and because it's a big country, a lot of people. And there was some flights going from Brazil to Africa over the South Atlantic, which should be a pretty short jog. And when they got over about 150, 200 miles out, they'd vanish.
Hmm.
And all the planes started vanishing. And that's when once I saw, I didn't have to watch that very long. It only took me a couple hours before I was going, so that's how you would do it. Because if you can't show the routes, then you hide the routes. So what the GPS system is, in my opinion, was even designed to do was to mask how the flights were actually getting from point A to point B. And so what they would do is, like the Santiago Chile flight, the flight, yeah, people say, well, that you got nonstops. It's like, fine, show me how they got there, because I can guarantee you they're not going across the ocean, because they're starting to fly and then they blink out. And then an hour before they land, they blink back in, and then they land. It's like, well, it's magic. It's a miracle.
Right.
That's, go figure. The plane disappeared, nobody knew where it
Mhm.
was, and now it's going to land in its exact spot. And they say, well, that means that the flight actually happened. I go, yeah, the flight happened. In fact, people were saying you should go down on these flights. I'm just going, even if I was on the flight, I couldn't prove anything, because I couldn't tell you how I got there.
Right.
So, and if I was flying at night, then I would be totally screwed. It'd be a waste of money. So their option was, they figured, we'll just kill all the flights in the southern hemisphere off the radar, off the GPS system. Therefore, if it's out of sight, out of mind, nobody looks for them, and nobody talks about them. And it's overkill, but that's what they do. And up until now, it's worked. But
And so we have the same military-industrial complex
Yeah.
who made Antarctica, the interior of Antarctica, off limits,
Yeah.
is the same one who's designed this GPS system
Yep.
that we're following. Okay. Now, on a flat Earth model, where do the hemispheres come in, and the magnetic north and magnetic south? How do we look at those things?
on a flat model, you got to remember that the southern hemisphere, it gets pushed out. So the northern hemisphere stays pretty much the same, like it would. If you squished, if this thing was squishable, the northern hemisphere would stay where it is, but the southern hemisphere gets flattened out, on the outside of it. So the southern hemisphere gets stretched on the outer ring. So instead of a northern hemisphere, you really have an inner ring and an outer ring. And most of the continents are on the northern hemisphere anyway, so it's okay. But when it comes to magnetic north and magnetic south, that really doesn't change much. You put a magnetic field where the North Pole is, and then the entire outer ring is the south, magnetic. You use a weaker field there, and the compasses still work out perfectly fine.
Okay, and we know magnets can do that. They can radiate out, so it's going from here and it's radiating outward.
Sure. Plus,
and then
again, if it's a closed system, magnetism is, you can do all sorts of fun things there if you wanted to. I'm still trying to figure out what's going on in the Bermuda Triangle, if that's some sort of error or if it's deliberate, because there's still some weird stuff happening there.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Now we're going to get into video number 8, which we start to look at a bit more of a different aspect of the implications of this, and how we, as those down here in this model, in this Earth, how we're interpreting and looking at this.
Yeah. So number 8 was creative force, and that was really done as more of a motivational thing for people, because by the time I got into 8, there were people were definitely buying into the model, but they were saying that, look, you just got rid of the universe. You just took the universe from an infinite place where we were just this tiny little thing to now a one-room apartment. And it's like, well, and now they've got, small world syndrome. It's like, look, it's still a very big world, and you weren't going into space anyway. So fine, it's like, so it's not infinite space, but you weren't going there. So I don't think it was that bad. But what I tried to do was give them a perspective on the good things of this world, and why, an example of a previous enclosed system, and then what we might, someone might build this enclosed system for. And I started out with my take on, and even though I didn't mention it by name, I figured people would pick up on it, which was the Tower of Babel story, and which went into, for those of you who don't follow, biblical stuff, the Tower of Babel was a story of a civilization that was so powerful and so ambitious that they started to build a tower that they said could reach the heavens, which always bugged me, even in Sunday school, kind of bugged me, because it's like, okay, where are you going? If it's on a globe, you're not going anywhere. So, but on an enclosed model, you know exactly where you're going. You're
Right.
going to the ceiling. In fact, you even know how high you have to build this thing. And I think that's exactly what they were trying to do was see if they could make it. And by that point, there was, people have said, well, isn't that kind of sad? They pressed the reset button, but I said, they didn't kill everybody. They just, divided the languages and said, look, that particular civilization was too good at what they were doing. They were too focused. They were too single-minded, and they apparently were quite arrogant on top of it.
Right.
So, and then I went into, again, just kind of to give people inspiration, I went into what I found, as far as an enclosed system, even though this world has a lot of pain and suffering and ugliness to it, there's still a lot of individual beauty that we create, most notably from the arts and the disciplines in the arts and all the things we make. And I tried to explain to people, look, everybody's a part of it. Yes, there's certain people that paint and sculpt and do all these things, but they are influenced by other people, and for every one of them, there's all sorts of people that have dreams, and everything's just stuck in their head, and they can't get it out for whatever reason. And it was for me, it was very inspiring to make, because when I woke up, when thinking about it, I started going down the narrative in my head, and by the time I got to the point where I was really boosting people, up and saying, look, we've all got, very, very special qualities and creative qualities, I started to get, kind of misty. And I said, I knew that I was like, I absolutely am doing this one. People may think it's cheesy, but the response I've gotten has been wonderful from it.
Right. Well, Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage and we are merely players.
Indeed.
Yeah. It was the time when I really started watching these and paying more attention was around the time of the Oscars. And I had just watched everything. And then I was watching the Oscars. And what I noticed stuck out, because I saw a flat stage with a dome over it, and all these lights looked like planets and stars. And it got me thinking, wait a minute, this sounds and looks a lot like what I was just hearing described in this flat earth model. And then I started thinking about what Shakespeare said and thought, wait a minute, there's something here to this that, we kind of know, but we're kind of not afraid, or too afraid to touch.
Yeah. You wonder if, from a creative standpoint, if there's creative influences they're subconsciously doing this, that they're being drawn to it. Why do we have so many stages? Why are all stages like that? The flat thing with the enclosed dome and I try to stay positive, and that's I really love that aspect of us.
It'd be interesting to find out that, all around this earth, outside of the dome, you've got just seats and someone selling tickets, and there's people coming into the theater and they're watching and they're just seeing what's going on in the showdown.
That would be a wonderful, wonderful thing. That'd be a happy ending. I'd buy a ticket for.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah. Okay, so that brings us to the next video, which is very significant. It's called Hiding God, in which God and the nature of who the creators are is kind of kept from everybody, which is really not very nice.
No. The Hiding God, I initially started out as a call out, because people are always looking for, what to do next. What are we doing in the conspiracy world? It's always this loose end that nobody seems to touch. It's like, well, what do we do now? Now that we believe in this model, it's like, well, one, you do what you feel like doing, what your gut tells you. If it was me, what I would do is I would first thing I would do is, because there's rules, certain things that you can catch people without using the word flat earth, which, usually gets you thrown out of the building. The first thing I would do is contact your local state or federal representatives and tell them that, look, my family flies every once in a while in the Southern Hemisphere, and I want to know why the GPS safety net, that the American government designed, and it should be all encompassing. Remember, GPS stands for Global Positioning System, not regional, not partial. Why is it turned off below the equator? Why when I flow over the ocean, am I at risk? Am I in danger? That's a point of debate. The second part is appealing to the corporate greed of especially this country, but any oil companies or mineral companies, which is, look, everybody knows that the oil companies and the mineral companies can get in just about anywhere. They have unlimited resources for development, and yet they have, and there's all this money sitting under, on Antarctica, millions of square miles of resources just waiting to be taken, and you guys can't go get it. And I want to know why.
Right.
People should be asking that. Look, if you work in the oil industry, the petroleum industry, this should be a primary thing. And yeah, you may not get anywhere. People may say, oh yeah, it's a question of national security. But I'd come back and say, which nation? Because apparently nobody owns Antarctica. It's the only piece of real estate in the world. Nobody owns it. So if nobody owns it, then who's telling you can't go there?
Right.
And again, if you're the oil company, you've got briefcases, you've got trucks full of money, and you can't get in there. I'm not buying it. Not for a second. And then the last thing was appealing to the churches, because if you were going into, if, let's say, back in 1955, 1956, you find the edge, you find the firmament, you find the big handprint of God right there, and let's call it what it is. If it's built, if it's a structure, if it was created, then creator, creation, God, you're not gonna be able to dodge that forever. Anyone out there say, well, it's an alien force field. Fine, it's an alien force field, but it's still closer to God than anything else you've seen. And
someone built it.
Yeah, somebody built it. And if that's the case, then a decision was made 50, 60 years ago to hide that from the church. And that probably wasn't the best move in the world, because when it does, if and when this thing does get revealed, there is a chance, that there's going to be some backlash. And I talk about that, and we'll talk about that, in the next one. It's like there should be a temperament as far as the backlash. But every church has a vested interest in this. And that is, if you have faith, everybody that has faith, everybody that has a holy book, they want to know, not just the meaning of life, but they want to have confirmation of some sort of creator. And if that is literally something that they can find, if they could walk up to it and bang on it with their hand, they will absolutely do it. If people would have pilgrimages, they would go out to the ice with cold weather gear. I guarantee it. And if that's hidden, well, then somebody should bring it up. And there's a lot of religious people out there that I think have a right to know.
And the next one, the last one of the series, number 11, is Souls in the System. So
Souls in the System was my attempt, and I think a pretty good one, to show people, because people kept asking, well, if there's an enclosure and we find out about it, aren't bad things going to happen? We're going to burn cities down and do all these awful things. And initially, when I was doing number 5, I thought, there's a chance, there could be a knee-jerk reaction. People could run through the streets screaming, absolutely. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought that if it was enclosed, the enclosure itself would change the tone of people. And to try to buffer people into that idea, what I used was I referenced, and it was an odd reference, but I think it worked. I used a 2004 documentary called Astronauts Gone Wild. And it's an interesting little documentary that a lot of people don't know. And I don't recommend people go watch it, because the whole premise was the reporter in question set up these fake interviews where he really tried to trip up the astronauts in the little details. He had all these lists of things he was going to go over. But what he really did was, he brought out, a Bible. And he said, put your hand on it and tell me you didn't, or tell me you actually flew to the moon. And you're thinking, well, okay, how well is that going to go? Because it's like, look, people commit perjury all the time, and these astronauts have been, part of the deception for decades. So what would it matter, right? Well, that was the funny thing, because the astronauts wouldn't put their hand on the Bible and say they went to the moon. And actually, in reality, it was probably the first time anyone had ever asked them that over all those years. Because why would anyone ever ask it? It's a weird question, but they wouldn't put their hand on it. In fact, most of them wouldn't even touch it. It was like this thing was radioactive. And I thought that was really strange, because from even an objective point of view, I was going, well, even if they were, super devout Christians, one, the odds say that not all these astronauts, plus they were scientifically trained. It's like, why would they be so, what were they afraid of? Were they afraid of, were they afraid of God? Is that, what, you're not going to swear on the Bible? Because remember, this wasn't court. So if it's not court, there's no penalty. So fine, you lie on that guy. What would it make any difference? And then it just sort of crept up on me where I was thinking, these are the guys that were one of the few groups of astronauts and NASA people who are probably told, it's like, look, you got to go fake it. Here's why you got to go fake it. It's a matter of national security. It's a matter of world security, and you got to fake it. But in telling them that, what you were basically telling them is that it was built. And if it was built, it was created. And if it was created, well, are you going to put your hand on something and lie deliberately? And, knowing that it's like that basically there's this fear of retribution, and it may not even be a logical fear, but you're not going to roll those dice. And what I'm saying is, at that point, it's almost like there's a scorecard involved. It's that Santa naughty and nice thing. Naughty and nice doesn't mean anything to children unless you see Santa Claus. As soon as you see him for real, if he's in front of the fireplace, naughty and nice takes on a whole nother meaning. So these guys were like going, yeah, I'm not going to lie. No, I'm not going to do anything. They're just not going to do anything. And so then it just kind of hit me. It's like, you know what? If that's those guys, and granted, those were, fairly upstanding guys from what we're told, but imagine what the general population would do. Because, with the general population, would you go beat somebody up? Would you steal? Would you murder? Would you dare roll those dice? Even though, there's nothing. They're not beaming. They don't print everything up top. It's like, okay, here's the general guidelines. Every religion, of course, has them, but and those are also sinking in your head as well. But the point is that everybody knew at the same time where we were. I mean, wars would end right away. You're fighting another guy. A whole bunch of guys. You're exchanging cannon fire. Why would you ever do that again? Why would you do anything malicious towards anybody? So a lot of the bad things would be tempered. And people say, well, that's restrictive. That's Big Brother. That's the ultimate, man looking over your shoulder. And it's like, well, no, what it is a reminder that you're not alone. And you're accountable for your actions. And really, why were you going to do those bad things in the first place? Which is why I put in the red light example. It's like, look, everyone's run a red light. That's not even the question. But as soon as you know that they installed a camera on that intersection, you're not running the red light anymore. Why not? Because you're not supposed to run red lights, and it's a bad idea. It's unsafe. There's bad things that can happen when you run red lights. And if there was a giant red light camera on this place, people, people can still have fun and do great things, but it stops a lot of the negative reinforcement that we pass on to people. It's again, there's, people of course will fight and do things, but I think from an objective standpoint, so much good and so much positive energy would be thrown back into our world that collectively, I think we'd look around and say, you know what, we should have never been doing this stuff in the first place.
Right.
So.
And I think people are ready for that change, because you hear so much talk of out in the world, people are waking up. They see that there's this seems to be an agenda to remove God from things, and I think that's irritating people enough now to understand that can't happen, because it throws everything out of balance when you pull divinity out of the mix.
Agreed.
And so as I understand it, as kind of a little wrap-up of what I understand here, for thousands of years, the ancients believed that the world was flat.
Yep.
And somewhere around the medieval times, Copernicus posed the idea that it was a globe, even though they had nothing to prove
Yep.
it. And so we went forward from that point with this assumption that the world was round,
Yep.
until it got to the point where Admiral Byrd in the 50s started discovering and exploring Antarctica, and it's believed that they found something of great value there that was going to provide the world with a year's worth of resources There were many countries that were involved with this process to help feed the world with these resources.
Yep.
And then suddenly, for no reason at all, they just stopped. And Antarctica was made off limits by the military-industrial complex, who was the same one who created the GPS system and shows us the directions of where things go.
Yeah.
And so now here we are at a time where it's somewhat taboo to look at these subjects because we've been conditioned not to look at these subjects.
Yeah.
But somewhere in our collective unconscious, we understand something's going on because we see this theme popping up in movies all the time, and we seem to understand that there's something more out there, which brings us to where we're at and the questions that are asked people. I know, what's the meaning of life? And if we really address this issue,
Yeah.
it seems like it would really address that question. The meaning of life is much bigger than any of us could possibly imagine, and that would certainly solve that question about the creator, because now we'd all be questioning who made this structure, because it certainly wasn't man.
Agreed.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right. So, well, I never thought I would find myself being a flat earther, but here I am.
Good for you.
Here I am. So, any final thoughts or?
Just you for those out there, and I know, again, there's going to be skeptics, but just try to get your head around it for the smallest fraction. Give it 60 seconds. And if you still think it's absolutely impossible, then again, ask the question yourself. It's like, how do you know? How do you know? Because right?
Exactly, because we've got NASA's the only source that we are shown, and NASA we know is faked so many things. The National Association of Space Actors.
Yeah.
They just fake things, and we believe them and go on with our lives because we can't be bothered. We're too busy.
Yeah.
We have to work. We have to go to this. We have to do that.
Yeah. If you don't have the picture, if the picture isn't taken, in the late 60s, how do you prove this?
Right.
How do you do it?
It's a big story, and hopefully more people are going to really kind of explore this and use their critical thinking, which is so important. And, it sounds like from the response you're getting that that's already starting to happen.
Yeah, everything's been really, really positive. And again, that alone is shocking to me. I thought I would get hate mail. I have still yet to get a single debunker that has gotten on me either by the phone or email, because I put my phone in email and everything, my home address is on there. You can drive to my house.
Yeah.
And no one has said, this is why it's a globe. Here's the proof. You're wrong. Shut up. No one's ever said that. And granted, it has not been out that long, but you would think, given that I covered so many different topics, that someone would take something. And the closest I ever got was the long haul, number 7, where people were saying, oh, well, there's nonstop flights, so you must be wrong. And then I said, oh, yeah? Here's what I think of your nonstop flights. They don't exist. Or they exist, but they're vanished. So, yeah, somebody find something. Come at me.
Yeah,
I'm right here.
And we see examples, when we hear about planes disappearing, it kind of confirms that there's something in place that can make a plane disappear by just shutting off some sort of system.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Awesome. Mark, thank you so much for being here. I hope more and more people tune on to this subject and really explore it, because it's definitely a subject worth exploration.
Thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.